Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Before we start tonight's meeting, we'd like to provide a brief Zoom webinar orientation. All meeting attendees will be muted for the duration of this meeting. Attendees are welcome to submit questions through the Q&A box in the bottom of the left-hand corner of your Zoom toolbar at any time. Our team will be holding questions until after the presentation. Following this presentation, questions will be read aloud and answered by a member of the team at that time. All questions will remain anonymous. As a reminder, questions or comments submitted as part of this webinar will not be considered formal comments on the plan. All formal comments must be submitted online, by mail, or during one of the in-person public workshops being held on Wednesday, June 12th from 6 to 8 p.m. and Thursday, June 13th from 6 to 8 p.m. The formal public comment period will be open through Friday, June 28th. Additional information on how to submit a formal comment will be provided in the chat and will be reviewed at the end of this presentation. I will now hand it over to Bob DeGrosse, Voyager's National Park Superintendent, to discuss the Voyager National Park Frozen Lake Surface Use Plan.
Thank you, Annabelle. And I just want to reiterate Annabelle's thanks and welcome to everyone who's participating this evening. I'm also joined by some of the other park staff here that will be assisting with answering questions after the presentation. Josh Wentz, our Chief of Visitor and Resource Protection, Brian Harmon, our lead for Natural and Cultural Resources, and Laura Bellasama, who is our lead for Facilities. And again, thank you for participating in this virtual presentation related to our Frozen Lake Surface Use Plan. As we go through this presentation this evening, the agenda basically will, some of this, if you have participated in these presentations last spring during our civic engagement period, some of this might be repeat, but we will be going over our project location and background, our existing conditions, the NPS regulations and legal concerns that we're looking at as we go through this process, the purpose and need for this planning effort, and then we'll talk about the preliminary alternatives, resource considerations that we'll be reviewing and assessing through the NEPA process. We'll talk about next steps and how to comment again, and then we'll open it up for the question and answer session. The project location is Voyageurs National Park, which is located in northern Minnesota along the Canadian border. It encompasses the large lakes or portions of the large lakes of Rainy Lake, Kabetogama Lake, Namakan, and Sandpoint Lake. Here you can see a better map showing the park legislative boundary with the heavy black line, the lakes that I just mentioned, and then what is typically our winter trail implementation, which includes about 130 miles worth of snowmobile trails throughout the park, plus an ice road up on the Rainy Lake area and another ice road down in the Kabetogama Lake area that typically, when conditions allow, extends from the Kabetogama Lake Visitor Center to the Ash River Visitor Center. The park enabling legislation specifies for allowing recreational fishing and includes provisions for winter sports, including snowmobile use. Management plans and special regulations for snowmobile use have been developed in the past. So those plans do address how snowmobiles can travel through the park. The one thing that the past plans did not address is other types of vehicles. So that's one of the things that we're really looking at as we go through this planning effort, is how do other types of vehicles other than snowmobiles, would they be managed on the frozen lake surfaces within the legislative boundary of the park? Prior to and since the park creation, motor vehicles have traditionally been accessing the frozen lake surfaces for a variety of recreational opportunities, primarily ice fishing, but for other purposes as well. And the National Park Service over time reinstituted a longstanding tradition and practice of establishing plowed ice roads out into the park as well. And I mentioned those earlier, the road that's up on the Rainy Lake Basin and the one that's down in Kabetogama. Currently, we plow about 13 miles on Rainy Lake and about 14 miles down in Lake Kabetogama when conditions allow. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, the conditions have not been good enough for us to establish a plowed ice road over the entire extent that we typically plow. We tend to not start plowing the ice roads until we reach 12 to 14 inches of good ice. We started establishing the Rainy Lake Ice Road in '79 and the Kabetogama Road in 2010. And generally motorized vehicles, including street legal vehicles, ATVs, and UTVs, operate on the ice road within the park, as well as street legal vehicles. Off from our ice roads, we have established the practice of allowing people who want to place ice shelters the opportunity to plow up to a 300-foot, what we call a spur road, that allows them to get off from the ice road in such a fashion that they can set their ice shelter out without disrupting the use and potential flooding of the ice road and things. And visitor use and winter resort owners use snowmobiles in a variety of different ways to get ice shelters out. And then some commercial use authorized holders and private residents and resorts use other types of vehicles to get the ice shelters out as well and things. So we have the ice roads, the plowed ice roads, plus we allow that 300-foot placement of ice shelters that are placed by ATVs, UTVs, or street legal vehicles for a total corridor of about 600 feet wide from the ice road. Here again, you can see the existing conditions, the Rainy Lake Ice Road up in the northwest corner of the park, and then the Kabetogama Ice Road down in the center of the park. I believe the next slides show a more detailed view of that. Down in the Kabetogama area, we have the primary road that runs from the Kabetogama Lake Visitor Center over to the Ash River Visitor Center. Plus, we have a loop that goes up to the south side of Spung Island that allows people to access more areas to place their ice shelters. And then a few years ago, we implemented these two spurs that go from the primary ice road and across the snowmobile trail to accommodate safe travel across the snowmobile trail to allow more access to different areas of Lake Kabetogama to fish and ice fish utilizing, again, equipment other than snowmobiles. One of the main reasons why we're undertaking this, or I should say the main reason why we're undertaking this planning effort, is because the way we allow for motorized use onto the frozen lake surface is contradictory to Park Service regulation, and it's specifically Park Service Regulation 36 CFR Code of Federal Regulations 4.10 that specifically says that operating a motor vehicle is prohibited except on park roads, in parking areas, and then on routes or areas designated for off-road motor vehicle use. And that routes and areas are only allowed in other types of national parks, park units other than national parks. Use in areas are only allowed in national preserves, national lake shores, national recreation areas, etc., not in national parks. This is the Rainy Lake Road. Some more detail. Again, the primary road that typically goes out to the Black Bay Ski Trail, and then if conditions allow, goes around Springer Point and then out to Cranberry Bay, and then another loop that goes to the north side of Dryweed Island. And again, about 13 miles of ice roads typically that we try to establish on the Rainy Lake area. Again, The legal concerns that we're looking at as we go through this planning effort is that dispersed motor vehicle use, other than snowmobile use, away from an established road or away from an established parking area is contradictory to 36 CFR 4.10. We do recognize that our ice roads that we establish out on the frozen lake surface do meet the definition of a class 4 road per National Park Service regulations and guidance. So the purpose of this planning effort is to clearly identify and define where motorized vehicle use can take place on the frozen lake surfaces, while protecting the natural and cultural resources and providing for a broad range of visitor experiences consistent with the park's enabling legislation. Currently, park management allows for dispersed use of motor vehicles on the frozen lake surfaces, which is not consistent with federal regulations. We don't have a plan, so we're basically undertaking this plan so we can clearly define where the use is allowed and how it is allowed. And all the past planning efforts that the National Park Service has undertaken in relation to Voyageurs National Park never considered other types of vehicles other than snowmobiles. I want to be very clear that this planning effort does not include snowmobile use and access, because snowmobile use and access has been evaluated through past plans and clearly defined in the Code of Federal Regulations specific for Voyageurs National Park. So last spring, we went out to the public and we did civic engagement. The purpose of that was to say, look, we have this issue. We want you to know that we have this issue and that we have to go through the process to straighten this issue out. When we went out to civic engagement last spring, we had a preliminary proposal that we went out to the public with and said, hey, we're letting you know that we have this issue. This was the initial proposal that we came up with, and we'd like your feedback on it. And based upon the feedback, we will develop a range of alternatives that we will go through the NEPA process with. This that we're going through right now this week, and actually started back in May 28th of last month, when we started the public scoping process, is the beginning of our public scoping period for this NEPA process. So elements common to all alternatives that are within that newsletter that hopefully you have seen are that the way we will manage ice shelters would continue to follow the guidance established by the Minnesota DNR as it relates to registration and licensing guidelines. The park would continue to recommend that the combined weight of any vehicle and associated towing equipment shouldn't exceed 7,000 pounds, just because of the safety of the ice. And again, the state outlines that ice shelters should not be placed any closer than 10 feet apart. And we stipulate that ice fishing holes would be required to be at least 100 feet from the center line of any ice road to prevent any flooding or problems with the ice road. Portages, ice shelters transported across land portages would need to be on skis and transported by snowmobiles. Motor vehicles would continue to be able to use the Makuta portage down in the southeast corner of the park outside of Crane Lake through the issuance of a special use permit. However, that special use permit will not require the applicant to specify why they want to use the portage. We recognize the use of that portage is important for safe travel around the King Williams Narrows, but we want to manage the use of that portage through a permit system so that we can control when it's used primarily by snowmobiles and when it might be used by other vehicles. If you've read over the newsletter, you'll see that there's 4 alternatives. I'm going to go into alternative 1, 2, and 4 after we go over alternative 3, which is the revised proposed action. And this alternative is what we came up with from our what we heard during the civic engagement last spring. So in this revised proposed action, alternative 3, we are proposing that motor vehicle use would be allowed along NPS established ice roads and in associated parking areas, and along a parking area associated with the developed shoreline of Lake Kabetogama. These areas, the established ice road and the established parking areas, could be used by any vehicle that is registered and or licensed by a state. And we'll get into this later, but we're going to be talking about 2 different types of roads, staked roads and plowed roads. And we'll talk about the difference here in a little bit, but we encourage people to recognize when staked roads are established at about 8 inches of ice, and when plowed roads are established about 12 inches of ice, and assure that you are utilizing the road with the right equipment and the right size of equipment and things. We are still proposing that an ice access fee would be implemented for the motorized vehicle use along the ice roads and along the parking areas associated with ice roads. And this is just a proposal within this planning effort. We do not know what that fee would be, and we would have to do more civic engagement and public meeting processes to establish what that fee would be. Parking areas established associated with our roads would be 500 feet from the center line for a corridor of 1,000 feet along established ice roads. And individuals would be able to plow within that that associated parking area so that they could safely set their ice shelters, their ice fishing shelters. Now, the types of roads, as I said earlier, we would establish both plowed and staked roads. At the beginning of the year, once we reach 8 inches of ice, we would establish those as staked roads, and then vehicles that are appropriately sized for that amount of ice would be able to travel along those roadways. And of course, any of the roads, whether they be plowed or staked, would be established based upon weather conditions, ice conditions, staffing, and funding. The total mileage of roads that we're looking at, that you probably saw in the newsletter, is a total of 32 miles, about 16.5 miles on Rainy Lake and about 15.2 miles on Lake Kabetogama. Staked ice roads would be unplowed and ungroomed. They would just be staked very much like a snowmobile trail. They would require for us to establish them a consistent thickness of 8 inches of good ice or greater. And then of those 32 miles, that mileage is wrong and we have to fix this slide, but basically we would have the staked roads that would be established at 8 inches of ice or greater. Some roads would stay as staked only during the winter time, and then some of the roads would be converted to plowed ice roads based upon the conditions, and we'll show you more details of that on the map. We would establish the ice roads once we reach about 12 inches, or once we get 12 inches or more of good ice along the route. And again, like I said, some of the roads would stay as staked throughout the entire winter, and some of the roads would be converted to plowed. These next maps help to explain the differences between those. Again, you can see up here in the Rainy area, we have the main road that goes out to Grassy Bay. I'll just go to the next slides because they're more detail. But here is Kabetogama. We have the main road that would go from Captogama Lake Visitor Center over to the Ash River Visitor Center. We have the spurs still. We have the loop around Spung Island. And we have an additional spur that takes people out to the grassy areas. Once we reach 8 inches, we would establish all of these as staked roads. We are proposing through this plan that the road from Captogama to Ash River would be converted to plowed roads once we get adequate thickness, and the rest of these roads would just be as staked roads. And then we know that in years past, in recent history, for the most part, we've only been able to get out to the sledding hill here. So we're definitely going to be committed to trying to get to the sledding hill. But even if we can't get, even if all we can do is get to the sledding hill, this route here would still be staked and people could drive on it with the appropriate weight of vehicle. In Rainy Lake, again, once we get 8 inches of ice, we would stake this whole network of roads. Once we reach 12 inches of ice, we are proposing that we focus just on plowing from the Rainy Lake Visitor Center out to the entrance of Cranberry Bay here. The rest of the roads would stay as staked roads only for use of vehicles that can access the staked roads given their condition and their ice thickness. Revised proposed action for ice shelters. Ice shelters could be transported by motor vehicle along ice roads and within any of the parking areas associated with the ice roads. I'll go back to the map here a little bit. Here you can see the associated parking area is the 500-foot corridor on either side, or 500-foot area on either side for a 1,000-foot corridor. Here in Captogama, again, it's a 500-foot area for a corridor of 1,000 feet. And then we've also established this 500-foot corridor along the developed area of the Lake Captogama community. Any ice shelter that's not associated or that's being transported not associated with an ice road would have to be transported via snowmobile. The weight of motor vehicles and ice shelters should meet the weight restriction given of the given ice thickness. Permanent ice shelters may be left unoccupied throughout the whole season, just following state regulations. And again, we want the ice shelters to be placed far enough away from the road so that it doesn't disrupt the traffic on the road or create flooding issues. And so on plowed ice roads, ice shelters should be about 50 feet from the edge of the plowed area, and on staked ice roads, it should be about 100 feet from the center of the road. You will notice that in alternative 3 here, we stepped away from the zoning concept that we initially introduced during our public civic engagement last spring. This alternative does not have the zoning concept. Alternative 1, again, that was alternative 3. I just wanted to start with that one because that is the major change from what we talked about during civic engagement. Alternative 1 is continue current management. This is not selectable. This is not a selectable alternative because it is contradictory to the regulations that we're required to abide by within the park. And basically, alternative 1 is basically what I talked about as I did an overview of the current condition. Alternative 2 is what we took out during civic engagement last spring as a preliminary proposed action. This is the one where we introduced the concept of having a moderate use zone and a low use zone. And it had all of our ice roads as we have them now. It doesn't consider the extension of the ice roads that we are recommending or proposing an alternative 3. Here you can see, again, in alternative 2, we just have the typical ice roads that we have been establishing in years past, and then the zoning that we talked about during civic engagement last spring. In alternative 2, what we talked about last spring, we were talking about only allowing the ice road or the ice shelters along the established ice roads and the established associated parking areas. And in the low use zone, we were recommending or proposing that ice shelters only be left out there during times of use, and that they would have to be removed when they weren't being used. In the moderate use zone, basically it was as we are operating now, the ice shelter could be set out during the entire season based upon Minnesota DNR guidance in terms of when they have to be removed by and things. Alternative 4 is an alternative that basically says that we don't have any ice roads. The only access would be by snowmobile. And the main reason why we have this alternative in here is so that we can measure any action that we take based upon having no motorized vehicle use other than snowmobiles and things. Through this planning effort, the main resource considerations that we've been mindful of and that we will be analyzing any action against are visitor use and experience, overall safety, lightscapes and visual resources, wildlife, socioeconomics, the soundscape, and water and air quality. And as we go through this planning effort, we definitely want you to advise us if there are other resource considerations that we should be measuring our actions against and things. The project schedule, right now, we have started the NEPA scoping process. The comment period started on May 28th. It closes on June 28th. After the comment period closes, we will analyze the comments and we will start developing the environmental assessment related to any potential action that we undertake. After we complete that environmental assessment, which should be later this calendar year, we will go out to another public comment period so that people can review and provide comment. And we anticipate that a decision document related to this action will be signed in around spring of 2025. Our next steps, after considering input received during the public scoping, it will be used to refine our alternatives and then start developing the assessment and identify potential impacts related with any action that we undertake. There will be one more public comment period, probably prior to the end of this calendar year. We really want you to take the time to review the newsletter that we have out there, to review our current proposed action alternative, and provide us feedback on, again, what you like, what you don't like, and how you recommend that it should be modified if there are things in it that you do not like. Here, I'll turn it back over to Annabelle.
Thank you, Bob. Everyone's comments will directly inform the plan and are invaluable to the National Park Service. The National Park Service asks that the public considers alternative approaches and ideas for addressing the purpose and need of this project, the range of environmental and socioeconomic issues that need to be considered, other potential projects or actions that might affect or be affected by this project, information that needs to be considered, such as related research, or information on how you use the park and how the park might affect that use. On the next slide, we're going to review how you can submit formal comments. So to submit formal comments, they can be submitted online at the website shown above. I'll also throw that in the chat for folks. You can also submit by mail to Voyageurs National Park. Address is above and will also be in the chat for you guys. Or you can attend one of the upcoming in-person public workshops that are being held on Wednesday, June 12th from 6 to 8 at Rainy River campus of the Minnesota North College in the Commons area, or on Thursday, June 13th from 6 to 8 p.m. at Catatogaما Town Hall. And now we are going to open the meeting up to questions. All meeting attendees are welcome to submit questions through that Q&A box in your Zoom toolbar. All questions will be read aloud and answered by a member of the team at this time, and all questions will remain anonymous. So we've got about 15 attendees on here. If folks would like to add some questions or comments into that Q&A feature on that bottom of the toolbox, we will answer them.
Just a reminder, we will be, as Annabelle said, we will be doing public workshop Wednesday night at the Commons area of the Rainy River campus of Minnesota North College. That's on Wednesday from 6 to 8 in the Commons area. On Thursday from 6 to 8, we'll be meeting at the Catatogaما Community Center. Both of those obviously will provide an opportunity for the public to interact with park staff and have small group conversations about things. I'll be doing this presentation, and then we'll break up into small group conversations about so that people can share their input. Also want to remind everyone that the best way to provide your input is through that website, parkplanning.nps.gov VOYA, and that will take you to the project website that will have that's where the newsletter is. That's where all of the documentation that was developed related to last spring's civic engagement is found. Really take your time to review the newsletter and provide input, substantive input about things that you like and things that you feel that should be tweaked, and recommendations on how you feel they should be tweaked.
Thanks, Bob. What about groomers on ice for the snowmobile only?
For most of those, so for the most part, from my understanding, the vehicles that are traveling on areas that are not groomed by the snowmobile groomers and things like that are types of vehicles that can access those areas to begin with and everything. So we haven't really thought of that. One of the big things that we have to do as we go through this process is what is that balancing act of being able to maintain everything that we implement. And of course, we have our snowmobile trails and things like that that are a high priority for us to implement. And then, our ice roads, for the most part, before we start plowing, the likelihood is that the vehicles are going to be the type of vehicles that can traverse that terrain and everything. But if you have ideas on that, please let us know. But I will tell you the biggest thing is the balancing act between what we implement and how much we implement and what we can maintain.
Thanks, Bob. Will the plowed road routes be set indefinitely, or what if changes can need or what if changes need to be made? Can that be done without a new plan and just via the superintendent's compendium?
For the most part, and this goes back to that balancing act again, right? What is the amount of stuff that we can implement and what is the amount of stuff that we can maintain and everything? Um, this planning effort outlines the the ice road networks that we have been hearing about and that we have had implemented. So if you have ideas on tweaks to the ice roads, I would encourage you to submit those ideas through this process and everything. I do believe that as we develop this plan, it does allow us some leeway to make tweaks based upon conditions in the field and everything like that. Very much like our snowmobile trails. Our snowmobile trails are primarily a concept and we try to stay within the mileage and everything like that. But the way that snowmobile access plan was written, the snowmobile use plan was written, it allows us some leeway in terms of moving things within reason and things like that. And this plan should do the same.
Thank you. On the Alt 3 Rainy Lake map showing the ice road slash staked ice road with the parking area overlaps the snowmobile trail. Will the snowmobile trail be moved, or what is the plan to not have vehicles on or too close to the snowmobile trail so there is not user conflict?
So we will have to look at possibly moving the snowmobile trail and also very clearly messaging with the public about the challenges of traversing the snowmobile trails and things like that. Right now in the compendium, and this would stay in the compendium is, or through this planning effort, is that you might be able to traverse the snowmobile trail, but you can't do anything to create a berm or disturb greatly the snowmobile trail. So you couldn't plow across the snowmobile trail and things like that. And so that is something that we should figure out how we define it in this planning effort.
Thanks, Bob. Attendees, we encourage you to continue putting questions or comments into the Q&A box.
The snowmobile trail on Rainy, for instance, the purple trail and the ice road and the parking area, that 300-foot area that we allow ice shelters to be set off from the road, that is in existence now for the most part. And really and truly, it's through our messaging to the people who want to plow or to set an ice shelter that we let them know that they really can't do anything that disturbs the snowmobile trail because of safety considerations and things. So
Thanks, Bob. Does the Voyageurs National Park have the authority to control, regulate, and enforce its own regulations in regard to the use of vehicles, snowmobiles, trucks, automobiles, and other motorized vehicles, and the placement of fish houses on the Minnesota public waters?
I'll go ahead and answer that to some extent and then see if Josh wants to chime in and everything. But it is the position of the National Park Service that we have regulatory and jurisdictional authority on the lands and waters within the legislative boundaries of Voyageurs National Park. This question has been adjudicated several times in the past, and each time the courts have come back with agreement that the National Park Service does have regulatory and jurisdictional authority within the legislative boundaries of the national park. We try to work as closely as we can with the Minnesota DNR, and where we don't have a regulation, we of course adopt the state of Minnesota's regulation. But a very good example of this is how we manage PWCs or personal watercraft within the park. The federal regulation is that personal watercraft is not allowed within Voyageurs National Park, and therefore they are not allowed in the park. And the state has actually adopted that in their rules that they provide to boaters. Josh, do you want to answer any more on that at all?
Yeah, I can expand on that a little bit. And as a reminder, I'm Josh Wentz. I'm the chief ranger for the park here. So Bob hit it. The superintendent Gross hit it on the head, and we said this has been adjudicated. Just a little bit of a history lesson. If you go back into the 1971 public law, which created the national park, that's PL 91661. One of the quotes out of that public law is that the park shall include the lands and waters within the boundary as generally depicted on the drawing entitled "A Proposed Voyageurs National Park in Minnesota." If you go in and you find that drawing, it depicts the park largely as it is today. There was one subtraction and then one correlated addition. However, it is largely what you see today. About that same time, in the early 1970s, the state of Minnesota passed Statute 84B.01, where they mirrored a lot of the language in the public law and which created the park. And part of that states that the creation of the park was to protect the waterway system, which constituted the park. So again, we see that word water in the state's own legislation. If you fast forward a little bit to 1977, we have our first court case, which went to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, where the court found that the state was an active participant in creation of Voyageurs National Park, and that they had to have known that Congress intended that the park would encompass not only the land but also the water. So in 77, the Eighth Circuit said, yes, the park does include the water, and the park does have regulatory and jurisdictional authority upon the water. That was reaffirmed in the case of U.S. v. Armstrong in 1999. One of the important things there is there was an amendment to the state statute 84B.061 in 95. So with that in existence, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals again said that I'll just read the quote: 18 years after our decision in Brown 1, passing the law cannot alter the fact that the state consented to the National Park Service exercising jurisdiction over the waters of Voyageur National Park. And once a state cedes jurisdiction, they cannot unilaterally reassert it. So those are two court cases directly dealing with the park. There's one other one that is quite important, which dealt with the U.S. Forest Service in 1981, Minnesota v. Block. And that one dealt with whether the federal government, in this case the Forest Service, had the authority to not allow motors upon certain waterways in the newly designated wilderness area. The state of Minnesota took the U.S. Forest Service to court, arguing that they owned the navigable waters, and the Eighth Circuit found that the state did in fact own the navigable waters. However, they had to, quote, yield to any valid exercise of federal power. So that's another interesting read where it was reaffirmed that the federal government can exercise regulatory and jurisdictional authority over waters which are within the boundaries of their jurisdiction, despite who may own the lake bed or the water column. So there's been ample court cases which have discussed this, all three of those within this state, and it has been ruled time and again that the U.S. government can regulate the waterways.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. So we just like to remind all attendees that you can still post questions or comments into the Q&A down on the bottom panel. Would I be able to freely drive a four-wheeler from Crouse Bay / Cormorant Village area to a fish house on Rainy Lake City?
Yes, because Black Bay is not within the boundaries of the park. And I'm just trying to find the right map here. I apologize. Black Bay is not within the boundaries of the park for the most part. And the areas of Black Bay that are within the boundaries of the park are all within associated parking area and everything. So you could leave, for instance, Shay Shay and drive out and connect with our ice road and then the associated parking there and things. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then, matter of fact, you could even go beyond Rainy Lake City and drive out along the staked road to whichever area you'd like to fish around Dry Weed or down into Cranberry. Again, the vehicle needs to be licensed and or registered by a state. Back to one of the questions that was asked earlier in terms of tweaking the ice roads and things like that. You know, as we're going through this scoping period, that is, you know, something that we want to hear. Are there benefits of tweaking what we have laid out here in a certain manner and everything like that? So however you might be able to convey that to us, we're looking for that input and everything. So.
So crossing the plowed road would be okay on a
Yeah.
four-wheeler.
Yes, crossing a plowed road would be okay. You can drive on the plowed road with a four-wheeler. You can drive on the plowed road with any vehicle that is licensed and or registered by a state. Just going back and forth over the map slides of the proposed alternative or the proposed action alternative and everything. So people can have a little better look at it. I'm hoping that you find where it is online as well, and that you were able to either download it to your computer or however you tend to go back to saved information and things like that, so that you can review it in more deeply and everything.
Thank you. Follow-up question, would one have to pay to an access fee if they are accessing from their house near Crouse Bay / Cormorant Village?
Again, we're not sure if we're going to implement an access fee. It is a common practice in the state of Minnesota to establish access fees for resorts who establish roadways and things like that. If we were to establish an access fee, my initial thought is that, yeah, if you're anywhere within the park associated with a established road or parking area, that you would have to have the access fee if we implement that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just want to thank everyone for the questions that we've received so far and remind folks that they still are able to add any questions or comments into that Q&A box down there on the bottom of your Zoom panel. And I am just going to add the information about how to submit a formal comment into the chat box. All ice on the lake surface changes year to year, so changes are necessary. How do we maintain the staked trails if we don't have enough people to get done what already exists?
Well, I feel that we do have enough people to get done what already exists, hence the reason why we get it done. I know that there's the frustration of us not getting the ice roads implemented over the last years, but the reason why we haven't implemented the ice roads over the last years isn't because of lack of staffing. It's because of poor conditions and things. Believe me, though, all of us here at the park wish that we could establish the entire um, uh, ice road network and plow it, as we have in the past and everything. That might be a benefit of us going to this staked ice road concept, and the fact that we can establish the ice road at 8 inches instead of waiting until 12 inches. Of course, definitely advising people of the best equipment to be using and everything like that. Um, but again, I go back to the fact that the reason for us not being able to establish the plowed ice roads in years past, since about 2017 or so, is not because of the staffing. It's because of the ice conditions. And again, too, what is that sweet spot of having uh, a network of ice roads that we can maintain? We feel through the process of developing this alternative that we can maintain what we are proposing here. Maintaining meaning going out and establishing it, much like a snowmobile trail, identifying the staked route and everything, the staked road and everything, and also regularly going out and checking the condition of that roadway. I hope that answered that question.
Thank you.
Anything else coming in?
That's it at the moment.
Okay. One last thing that I would like to say is that, obviously we mentioned as we were giving the presentation that the purpose of doing this planning effort is to assure that what we are allowing within the park is within the regulations that we're responsible for enforcing and everything like that. I think that it's very important to very clearly define and identify what is allowed and where it is allowed, so that everybody knows where they can do things and where they can't do things. My hope is to allow for a reasonable amount of access into the park via vehicles, not again including snowmobiles, because that's a different issue and that has been clearly defined in the past. But recognizing that this is a longstanding use here in the area, something that people want to do to access the frozen lake surface for fishing purposes, for just getting out and enjoying the day out on the frozen lake surface. One of the greatest things that I think there is to go out on a February night when it's 20 below zero and, drive out on the ice and step outside your car and just, it feels like you can reach up and grab the stars and things. So that is one of my objectives of this process, is to very clearly define what is allowed, what is not allowed, and where is it allowed, and recognizing the continuance of allowing something that's been taking place here for a long time, because it is a unique opportunity that we can experience here at Voyagers.
Thank you. Doesn't look like there's any more questions in the Q&A at this time, but I do just want to remind folks that they can still put questions or comments into that Q&A box.
I will say too, a couple of other things that have been in my mind as we've gone through this process is, I know one of the things that we heard during civic engagement last year was, well, why don't we just try to establish a park-specific regulation as it relates to Voyageurs National Park in consideration of this use? We did go to Park Service leadership in the region and Washington and pose that concept, and they did not feel comfortable doing a park-specific regulation that is contradictory to a nationwide regulation. And so that's where they told us, go back and see what can you do to fit, or what use can you fit within the regulation. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do here and everything. Anything else coming in?
Nope, no new questions in the
No.
chat box.
We have been here about an hour. It's 7 o'clock now. I forgot to mention at the beginning of this opportunity that the likelihood is that it wouldn't go until 8 in consideration of the questions and the number of participants and things like that. So if there isn't any other questions, we might wrap it up here. I just want to remind people of the public workshop opportunity on Wednesday and Thursday, Wednesday being at the Rainy River campus of the Minnesota North College in the Commons area, and Thursday being down at the Lake Cabotogama Community Hall. Again, 6 to 8. I hope that you can go to one of those workshops to engage in more of a one-on-one, face-to-face conversation. If you're not, though, please look over our newsletter. And like I said, please submit to us any substantive comments that you might have. I know I heard some related to some of the questions tonight, about, should we look at realigning the proposed road and parking area in consideration of the snowmobile trail? How will we message and define what vehicles can cross snowmobile trails? And there were, is this going to be the alignment here, or is there the opportunity for us to tweak the alignment in the future and everything like that? So those were very good questions. And if you want to take those questions to the next steps and actually provide us with some recommendations that you might have in relation to those questions, that would be greatly appreciated and everything. Give it one more minute here, Annabelle.
Sure. If you guys have any last minute questions, please post them into the Q&A.
Not seeing any. I want to thank everyone for participating. Oops. Sorry about that. I want to thank everyone for your participation this evening. I know that online opportunities like this are challenging and have some frustrations with them, but I do appreciate those of you who did participate online this evening and those of you who submitted questions as well. And again, please submit your review and comment formally through the park planning website as well. I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone
Thank you.
for coming. Hopefully we'll see you at one of the in-person workshops.